Brandon had just finished a long shift at the auto repair shop when he spotted her standing beside her car in the near-empty grocery store parking lot. Frustration written all over her face. The hood was up, and she was biting her lip, staring at the engine like it had personally offended her. He could have ignored it, could have driven off and let someone else be the good Samaritan. But something about her, the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, the way she tapped her fingers anxiously against the car door, made him pull into the parking spot beside her. "Need a hand?" he called out, stepping out of his truck. She turned, startled, and for a second he forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful in a way that caught him off guard. Warm brown eyes, a soft but determined expression, a kind of quiet strength in the way she squared her shoulders even as she was clearly out of her depth. Yeah, actually," she admitted, exhaling in relief. "It just won't start." "I don't know what's wrong with it." Brandon glanced at the car. "Battery's probably dead." "You got cables?" She shook her head. "I was hoping it'd magically fix itself if I stared at it long enough." He chuckled, grabbing his jumper cables from his truck. "That only works about half the time." She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made something tighten in his chest. As he set up the cables, she watched him closely, arms crossed against the slight chill in the evening air. "You do this often? Fix cars?" "Yeah, kind of my thing," he said, connecting the last clamp. "I work at a repair shop." "That explains why you look like you know what you're doing," she said, tilting her head. "I'm Tessa, by the way." "Brandon," he replied. "All right, give it a try." She slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Tessa let out a relieved sigh, grinning at him through the windshield. He unhooked the cables and shut the hood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You should be good now, but your battery might need replacing soon." Tessa stepped out of the car, her smile lingering. "I owe you one. Seriously." He shrugged. "Just glad I could help." She hesitated, then bit her lip. "Can I buy you a coffee? As a thank you?" Brandon wasn't expecting that. He had helped plenty of people jump-start their cars before, but none of them ever offered anything more than a quick thanks before driving off. He could have said no, could have nodded, said no problem, and gone on with his night. But there was something about her, something that made him want to know more. "Yeah," he said, surprising himself. "I'd like that." Tessa's smile widened. "There's a diner down the street. If you're free now." He glanced at his truck, then back at her. "Yeah, I'm free." And just like that, a simple favor turned into something else entirely. As they walked to their cars, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some random encounter. This was something different. Something that, for the first time in a long time, felt like the beginning of something real. The diner had a cozy, lived-in feel, the kind of place where the scent of fresh coffee hung in the air and the hum of conversation blended with the occasional clatter of dishes. Brandon followed Tessa to a booth by the window where the glow of the streetlights outside cast a soft halo around her. She slid into the seat across from him, her fingers curling around the laminated menu as she scanned it. "I feel like I should order something extravagant to make this a proper thank you gesture," she mused. "But honestly, I just want coffee." Brandon chuckled, settling into his seat. "Coffee works for me." The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a warm smile, appeared at their table with a notepad in hand. "What can I get you too?" "2 coffees, Tessa said, glancing at Brandon for confirmation. "And a slice of apple pie," he added on impulse. Tessa raised an eyebrow. "You a pie enthusiast?" He shrugged. "Figured if you're thanking me, I might as well make it count." She laughed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Fair enough." As the waitress walked away, Tessa leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the table. "So, Brandon, do you always come to the rescue of stranded strangers?" "Only the ones who look like they might start arguing with their car if left alone for too long," he teased. She sighed dramatically. "Guilty as charged. It's been a long day. My car breaking down was just the final insult." Brandon studied her, noting the subtle exhaustion in her expression. "Rough day at work?" "Something like that," she admitted. "I run a small event planning business. Had a client change their entire wedding theme at the last minute. Spent my whole day trying to undo weeks of planning." "That sounds like a nightmare." "You have no idea." She shook her head, exhaling. "But enough about that. What about you? What's it like working at a repair shop?" "It's honest work," he said. "I like fixing things. Seeing something broken and being able to make it right again." Tessa tilted her head, considering him. "That's a good way to look at it." Their coffees arrived, along with the pie, and for a moment they both fell into an easy silence as they added sugar and stirred. Brandon watched her as she absent-mindedly took a sip of her coffee, the way her lips pursed slightly at the heat before she set the cup down. There was something effortless about sitting here with her, like they weren't two strangers who had only met an hour ago but two people who had somehow fallen into the same rhythm. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "what's the most ridiculous car problem you've ever had to fix?" A grin tugged at the corner of his lips. Had a guy come in once swearing his truck was haunted. Said it would make a weird noise every time he hit a certain speed. And was it haunted? He shook his head, laughing. Turned out he had a loose soda can rolling around under his seat. Tessa laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "That's amazing. Please tell me you let him believe in ghosts for a little longer." "Maybe for a minute or two," he admitted. They talked easily, the conversation flowing from one topic to the next without effort. She told him about the most extravagant wedding she'd ever planned, and he shared stories about the strangest repair jobs he'd taken on. The diner around them faded into the background, the hours slipping past unnoticed. At some point, Tessa glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should probably get going. But I have to say, this was unexpectedly nice." Brandon nodded, reluctant to let the night end. "Yeah, it was." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "In case you ever need an event planned," she teased, though there was a quiet hopefulness in the gesture. He picked it up, running his thumb over the raised letters of her name. "I'll keep that in mind." Outside, the air had cooled, the night settling in around them. They walked toward their cars, the easy silence between them now carrying the weight of something unspoken. Tessa opened her car door but lingered, looking up at him. "Thanks again for helping me." Brandon met her gaze, something stirring in his chest. "Anytime." For a moment, it felt like there was something more to say, something hovering between them waiting to be acknowledged. But then she smiled, small and knowing, before slipping into her car. As she drove off, Brandon stood there for a long moment, watching her taillights disappear into the night. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like something had just begun. Brandon hadn't expected to hear from Tessa again. After all, people met by chance all the time, shared a moment, and then life carried on. He figured that night at the diner had been one of those fleeting, unexpected things, something to remember fondly but not something that would last. But when his phone rang a few days later and he saw an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen, he picked up without thinking. "Brandon?" The voice was hesitant but unmistakable. His pulse kicked up. "Tessa?" A soft chuckle. "You remembered. Hard to forget." He leaned against the counter in the shop's back office, wiping the grease from his hands with a rag. "Everything all right?" "Yeah, mostly. But, my car battery officially gave up on me." A sigh. "I was hoping you might be able to replace it." Brandon straightened. "Where are you?" "I'm at my place." "I can have it towed to a shop, but I figured I'd call you first. If you're busy, I'll be there in 20 minutes. A pause. "Really?" He grabbed his keys. "Yeah. Text me your address." Tessa's neighborhood was lined with small, charming houses, each one with neatly kept yards and porches adorned with potted plants. Her place was no different, a cozy blue house with a white trimmed door, the kind of home that looked like it belonged to someone who cared about the little things. She was waiting outside when he pulled up, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mix of relief and embarrassment. "I swear, I'm not doing this on purpose," she said as he climbed out of his truck. Brandon grinned. "You sure? Because I'm starting to think you just like seeing me covered in grease." She laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Busted." He walked over to her car and popped the hood. "You get a new battery already?" She nodded, gesturing to a box sitting nearby. "Picked one up earlier. I just had no idea what to do with it." "No shame in that." He rolled up his sleeves. "Give me 10 minutes. Tessa hovered nearby as he worked, occasionally peeking over his shoulder. "You really do know what you're doing," she mused. He shot her a look. "Had doubts?" "Not exactly. Just..." She shrugged. "It's nice seeing someone take their time with something. Like it matters." Brandon tightened the last bolt and closed the hood. "Well, I don't like doing things halfway." She studied him for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she reached into her back pocket and pulled out a folded bill, holding it out to him. He frowned. "What's that?" "Payment. For your time." Brandon wiped his hands on his jeans. "I'm not taking your money, Tessa." She huffed. "Come on. I can't just keep calling you for car problems and not pay you." He took a step closer. Then stop thinking of it as a transaction. She blinked up at him. What do you mean? His voice was quieter now, but steady. Maybe I just like helping you. Something shifted between them in that moment. The air charged with something unspoken. Tessa swallowed, her fingers tightening around the bill before she slowly lowered her hand. Okay, she said softly. Brandon exhaled, a small smile tugging at his lips. Okay. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Tessa cleared her throat and gestured toward her front door. You want some lemonade? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. Her kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of something faintly citrusy. A wooden table sat by the window, and she motioned for him to sit as she poured 2 glasses of lemonade. So, she said, sliding into the chair across from him, do you always play knight in shining armor for stranded women, or am I just special? Brandon chuckled. You're special. She tilted her head, considering him. That sounded suspiciously like flirting. He took a sip of lemonade, meeting her gaze over the rim of his glass. Did it? Tessa narrowed her eyes, but there was amusement in them. You're dangerous. Brandon leaned back in his chair. How so? You've got that whole quiet, confident, I fix things vibe going on. She waved a hand. It's unfair, really. He laughed, shaking his head. I'm just a guy who works on cars. Uh-huh. She took a sip of her drink, watching him over the rim. The silence that stretched between them wasn't awkward, it was thick with something else, something neither of them seemed quite ready to name. Brandon set his glass down. Why'd you really call me, Tessa? She blinked. I told you. My car. Nah, he shook his head. You could have had it towed. Could have asked a neighbor. But you called me. Tessa's fingers traced the rim of her glass. Maybe I just wanted to see you again. Honest. No hesitation. Brandon felt something tighten in his chest. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. Good. Tessa's breath hitched, her eyes searching his. Neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she turned her hand, her fingers curling around his. And just like that, the space between them disappeared. Brandon wasn't sure how long they sat there, fingers intertwined across the worn wooden table, the lemonade forgotten between them. The quiet hum of the house surrounded them, a faint ticking from the clock on the wall marking time that neither of them seemed in a hurry to acknowledge. Tessa's fingers were warm beneath his, her grip tightening slightly as if testing whether he would pull away. He didn't. If anything, he held on tighter. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her gaze flickering to their joined hands before lifting to meet his. This feels unexpected, she admitted. Brandon exhaled a quiet laugh. Yeah, but not bad. She shook her head. No, not bad. A breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying the distant sound of a wind chime from somewhere down the street. The moment felt delicate, like something that could shatter if either of them moved too quickly. Tessa was the first to break the stillness, gently pulling her hand away, not in retreat, but in the way someone does when they need space to think. She stood, moving toward the kitchen sink, her back to him as she rinsed out her glass. I don't usually do this, she said, her voice quieter now. Brandon leaned back in his chair, watching her. Do what? She sighed, gripping the edge of the counter. Let people in this fast. He considered that, nodding slowly. Yeah. Me neither. She turned, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. Then why does this feel so easy? Brandon didn't have an answer for that. He only knew that from the moment he'd seen her standing beside her car, frustration written all over her face, something had shifted inside him. Like a door had been opened that he hadn't even realized was locked. Tessa let out a breath, then pushed off the counter. Come on. He frowned. Where? She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door and tossed them in the air before catching them. I owe you a proper thank you. And since you refused to take my money, I'm cashing in on a different favor. Brandon arched an eyebrow. And that is? She grinned, already heading toward the front door. You'll see. Tessa drove them out of her neighborhood and onto a winding road that led away from the city. The hum of the car engine filled the silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like an extension of the quiet understanding they shared. Brandon glanced over at her, the passing streetlights casting fleeting shadows across her face. You gonna tell me where we're going, or is this some kind of elaborate kidnapping situation? Tessa laughed, shaking her head. Relax. It's a surprise. He chuckled. Not sure I'm the surprise type. You'll like this one, she promised, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. 15 minutes later, she pulled off onto a small dirt road, the tires crunching over gravel as they approached a grassy clearing. Brandon recognized the place immediately, a small overlook that sat at the edge of a lake, the water stretching out beneath the moonlight, dark and endless. She parked, cutting the engine, and turned to him with a triumphant smile. "Come on." Brandon hesitated for a beat before following her out of the car. The air was cooler here, the scent of damp earth and pine filling his lungs as he took in the view. Tessa walked ahead of him, stopping just at the edge of the overlook where the land sloped gently downward toward the water. He came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets. "All right, I'll bite." "Why here?" She exhaled, tilting her head toward him. "Because sometimes when everything feels too loud, I come here to breathe." Brandon studied her, the way the wind lifted a few strands of her hair, the way her shoulders seemed to lose some of their tension as she gazed out over the lake. "And you wanted to share that with me?" She nodded. "Yeah." Something about that hit him harder than he expected. They stood there for a long time, the occasional ripple of water the only sound breaking the silence. Tessa shifted beside him, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. Without thinking, Brandon shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She glanced up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." Her lips parted slightly as if she was about to say something, but then she just gave a small nod and pulled the jacket tighter around her. Brandon exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, what now?" Tessa turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "Now?" She took a step closer, the space between them shrinking to just a breath. "Now, I think we stop pretending this is just some coincidence." His pulse kicked up. "You think it's more than that?" She searched his face, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't you?" Brandon didn't answer. Instead, he reached up, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, letting his hand linger at her jaw. Her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. And when their lips met, it wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was the kind of kiss that felt like it had been waiting for the right moment to happen, the kind that didn't ask for permission because the answer had already been decided. Tessa melted into him, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as if anchoring herself. Brandon deepened the kiss, his fingers slipping into her hair, pulling her closer until there was nothing left between them but heat and the sound of their own uneven breaths. When they finally parted, Tessa pressed her forehead against his, her eyes still closed. "Well," she murmured, her voice slightly breathless. "That settles that." Brandon chuckled, his thumb tracing small circles against her cheek. "Yeah, I'd say so." She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her expression. "This scares me a little." He nodded, understanding. "Me too." She exhaled a soft laugh. "But not enough to stop?" Brandon shook his head, brushing his lips against hers once more. "Not even close." And just like that, whatever had started between them that night in the grocery store parking lot, whatever spark had been ignited had turned into something that neither of them could ignore. Brandon had always been the kind of man who took things slow, measured each step before taking it. But with Tessa, time seemed to fold in on itself, each moment pulling them deeper into something neither of them had expected. The kiss by the lake had shifted something between them. It wasn't just attraction, wasn't just the thrill of something new. It was a connection that felt like it had been waiting to happen, like they were two pieces that had finally clicked into place. But with that connection came an unspoken weight, a quiet understanding that this wasn't something either of them could take lightly. A few days after the lake, Brandon found himself standing on Tessa's front porch, the late evening air thick with the scent of rain from an earlier storm. He knocked once before she opened the door, her expression soft but searching, as if she'd been waiting for him. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She stepped aside, letting him in. The house was dimly lit, the glow from a lamp in the corner casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. A record was playing softly from the living room, something slow and bluesy, filling the space between them. Brandon shrugged off his jacket, hanging it by the door, watching as Tessa tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit he was beginning to realize. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Just thinking a lot." He stepped closer, searching her face. "About what?" Tessa let out a breath, crossing her arms. "About how fast this is happening." Brandon nodded slowly. "Yeah." He reached for her hand, tracing his thumb over her knuckles. "But does it feel wrong?" She shook her head immediately. "No. That's the problem. It doesn't feel wrong at all." His fingers curled around hers. Then what are we doing, Tessa? Are we overthinking this? She exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking her head. Probably. Brandon took another step closer, crowding into her space just enough to make her look up at him. Then let's stop thinking so much. Tessa studied him for a long moment, then without another word, she pulled him into the living room, sinking onto the couch and tugging him down beside her. She curled into his side, her head resting against his shoulder, and just like that, the tension melted away. They sat there for a long time, listening to the music, the rhythm of their breathing settling into something quiet and steady. At some point, Tessa whispered, "Tell me something real." Brandon considered that, his fingers tracing absent patterns against the back of her hand. "I used to think love was supposed to be complicated." She shifted slightly, tilting her head to look up at him. "What changed?" He exhaled. "You." Tessa's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around his. "Brandon, I don't mean to scare you," he said, "but I don't want to pretend this is nothing. I don't want to act like I don't feel it." She swallowed hard, her eyes searching his. "I feel it too." A beat of silence. Then softer, she added, "That's what scares me." Brandon reached up, cupping her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "Then let's be scared together." Tessa let out a shaky breath, her eyes shining in the dim light. Then she leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like a promise. And just like that, whatever had been unspoken between them was finally laid bare. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and unspoken truths, each one drawing Tessa and Brandon deeper into something neither of them had planned for, but both had stopped trying to resist. It was in the way their hands found each other's without thinking, the way their laughter filled the spaces between words, the way his presence steadied her in a way she hadn't known she needed. But the closer they got, the more Tessa felt the weight of something lingering just beneath the surface, something she had yet to say. Brandon had noticed it too. One evening, as they sat on her back porch, the air thick with the scent of damp earth after a brief summer rain, he finally spoke the question that had been resting on the tip of his tongue for days. "What are you afraid of, Tessa?" She hesitated, curling her fingers around the edge of her sweater sleeve. The sky above them was a deep indigo, the stars just beginning to flicker to life. She could feel his gaze on her, steady and patient, waiting for her to let him in. "I've built my life to be steady," she admitted finally, her voice quiet. "Predictable. I know how to handle work stress, I know how to deal with things when they don't go according to plan. But you." She turned to him, her expression raw. "You weren't in the plan. And I don't know how to do this without messing it up." Brandon's fingers brushed against hers, warm and grounding. "Tessa." He said her name like it was something to be held carefully, something worth protecting. "You don't have to know how to do this. We figure it out together." She swallowed past the lump in her throat. "What if I'm not good at it?" He exhaled softly, shaking his head. "You already are." A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain-soaked leaves. Tessa let out a slow breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I don't want to lose this." Brandon's expression softened, his fingers tightening around hers. "Then don't walk away from it." A beat of silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of cicadas. And then, as if something inside her had finally settled, she nodded. "Okay." Brandon's lips curved into something quiet and sure, and without another word, he pulled her to him, wrapping his arms around her and holding her as if he had no intention of ever letting go. And for the first time in a long time, Tessa let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to be something fragile. Maybe it could be something steady, something real. Something worth holding on to. Weeks passed, and whatever uncertainty had once lingered between them began to fade, replaced by something stronger, something unshakable. They built a routine together, late-night conversations over coffee, long drives with no destination, quiet afternoons where words weren't necessary. Brandon found himself looking for her in the smallest moments, the way she hummed under her breath when she worked, the way she curled her fingers into the fabric of his shirt when she kissed him, the way she made everything feel like home. And Tessa? She had stopped wondering if she was doing this right. Because with Brandon, there was no right or wrong. There was only them. One evening, as they stood in her kitchen making dinner, her chopping vegetables, him stirring a simmering pot on the stove, Tessa glanced at him, a thought forming in her mind before she could stop it. "Move in with me." Brandon paused, turning to look at her fully. The steam from the pot curled between them, but his focus was entirely on her. "You sure?" His voice was steady, but there was something careful in the way he asked it, like he was giving her space to reconsider. Tessa set down the knife, wiping her hands on a dish towel before stepping closer. "Yeah. I am." Brandon studied her for a moment, then reached out, brushing a thumb over her cheek. Okay. A slow smile spread across her face. Yeah? He nodded. Yeah. And just like that, another piece of their lives fell into place. Months later, as autumn settled in with crisp air and golden leaves, Brandon found himself standing in the middle of Tessa's living room, their living room, watching her rearrange a stack of books on the coffee table for the third time. Tessa. She glanced up, her hands still resting on the books. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his and pulling her toward him. Stop fussing. She huffed a laugh. I'm not fussing. I'm organizing. Brandon shook his head, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You do that when you're nervous. She sighed, resting her hands against his chest. It's just. This is real, isn't it? He smiled, wrapping his arms around her. It always was. Tessa let out a breath, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. I love you, Brandon. His grip tightened, his voice quiet but sure. I love you, too. And just like that, whatever had once been uncertain was now undeniable. They had found something rare, something worth holding on to. And neither of them had any intention of letting go.